Salvete omnes. This video was made possible through the support of patrons. Thank you. Was it Julius Caesar or Julius Caesar? And did he really say veni, vidi, vici and not veni, vidi, vici? How can anyone really know? In this video, we'll look at how scholars figured out how Classical Latin sounded. By Classical Latin, what is meant is the Latin spoken by the upper classes and the educated, which was used in literature and public speeches during the period of around 100 BCE to 200 CE. There were, of course, regional dialects that differed, and simply put, no one knows exactly how Classical Latin was pronounced, because there are obviously no sound recordings from that time. So no one knows how quickly it was spoken. But scholars have been able to reconstruct much of the pronunciation using various clues, but even this reconstruction is somewhat controversial, as we'll see near the end. One really useful clue is the adoption of Latin words into other languages. How do we know this word Caesar was pronounced Caesar with a hard k and not Caesar like we say in English? One source of evidence for this is that in ancient Greek and Gothic, the word was written like this. As you can see, there's a K at the beginning, which we know was a K sound in these languages. By analyzing Latin words that other languages adopted, scholars were able to gather indications of how certain letters were pronounced. Even English can give us a clue because the word wine came from the Latin vinum, and wall came from the Latin vallum. But as you can see with these words, sound changes can occur, so we can't rely on one word as our only source of evidence. Misspellings. One of the reasons scholars have been able to reconstruct Latin pronunciation is because the Romans wrote so extensively on misspellings and errors in pronunciation. One huge source of spelling errors is the Appendix Probi, which includes a list of common spelling errors like these shown here. What do spelling errors reveal? If two letters are often mixed up, it's a good bet that they sounded similar. And if two letters are never interchanged, they most likely sounded different. For example, the diphthong AE would sometimes be written as AI, but not as an E in classical times. So this gave a clue that this was probably pronounced I. And as we have seen in this list, certain words were getting spelled without their H, which indicates that maybe the H was being dropped in everyday speech. But the strict grammarians wanted to cling to their classical pronunciation, in which the H made a sound. Latin spelling is phonetic. Latin did not inherit its spelling from any earlier language, so it is a phonetic alphabet. The grammarian Julius Longus confirmed this, saying, Ita sane se habet non numquam forma enuntiandi, ut litterae in ipsa scriptione positiae non audiantur enuntiatae. The situation is that there is never a form of enunciation, so that the letters placed in the text are not heard when enunciated. In the following sentence, he also revealed that there was elision in words ending with an M. When a word terminating in M is followed by a word beginning with a vowel, that M was omitted. Quintilian wrote that it was barely pronounced, but Julius Longus, who lived later, claimed it was completely gone, saying, Sic enum cum dicitur, illum ego, et omnium optimum, illum et omnium, aeque M terminat, nec tamen in apparet. Roughly translated, this is, for when illum ego and omnium optimum is said, although illum and omnium terminate in M, it doesn't appear in them. And actually there is evidence of this literally carved in stone because there are inscriptions containing the word scriptus, which is the elided form of scriptum est. The Romance languages are revealing in their pronunciation, since they are, after all, Latin's ancestors. When we have a case where all or the majority of these languages contain the same sound, then it is likely that the original Latin pronunciation has survived in these languages. And the reverse might also be true. If there is a sound in none of the Romance languages, then it was probably not in Latin. Michael Weiss makes this argument from an analysis of the Sicilian and Lucanian languages, since these are very conservative languages. He thinks these languages are evidence that the long and short vowels in Latin differed only in length and not in their sound quality, as is traditionally taught. There have been other similar treatises written in recent years, so it seems that the final word has not been spoken on classical Latin pronunciation. Medieval and Renaissance Latin. So where did the pronunciation of Julius Caesar and veni, vidi, vici come from? From around the 3rd century CE, a strange shift began because Latin continued to be written in a form largely unchanged from classical Latin, while spoken Latin was changing significantly. And Latin continued to be used as the primary written language throughout the Middle Ages in Western Europe, particularly among scholars and scientists. For example, Isaac Newton's Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, in which he expounded the laws of motion and gravitation, was written in 1687 entirely in Latin. But the people writing in Latin were native speakers of other languages, so each country developed its own system of pronunciation. It was the English system of pronunciation that produced Julius Caesar, and ecclesiastical pronunciation, the form used by the Roman Catholic Church, that produced veni, vidi, vici. Of course, this all begs the question, how should we pronounce Latin? And there really is no right answer, because ultimately what we call classical Latin was only a 300-year period in the existence of Latin. As a Latin learner, you could choose whichever pronunciation system you would like to speak with, but it probably makes the most sense to learn the same pronunciation system as that of the people you want to speak with, if that is your goal. If you'd like to dive much deeper into the subject of reconstructing Latin pronunciation, check out Sidney Allen's Vox Latina, a guide to the pronunciation of classical Latin. It is a clearly written and very thorough book, providing evidence from inscriptions, linguistics, and statements by grammarians. But it does not require prior knowledge of linguistics, so it's not a terribly difficult read. Check it out if you can. And be sure to check out my video on how Latin became the Romance languages, linked here. And if you'd like to learn Latin, this playlist contains an easy introduction to the language through comprehensible input. Gracias!